Hey team, and welcome to another video in our Astrological Magical Elections video series. Today we're going to talk about those magical election opportunities that we're going to experience between our Pisces New Moon on February 20th and our Virgo Full Moon on March 7th. And this is a really fun time period because it is in a waxing moon period, which is where we find those more kind of like fun talismans that are more positively growth oriented, which tends to be what a lot of people want or are looking for when they're coming to talismanic magic, which is totally fine. And so it's always nice to be able to have those periods in time where I can help people kind of connect with what it is that they're looking for. And this is a particularly fun set of talismans that we have going on to where I feel like there's a lot here kind of hitting some of the big main themes, I think, of kind of like generally what people look for or are wanting, to where I'm hopeful that kind of no matter what your situation is or where you are, you'll be able to have a talismanic opportunity to take advantage of to help you with whatever situation it is that you are involved in. So hopefully, no matter where you are, no matter what you're going through, there's something here that can help you out. And also, I broke one of the bulbs on my candelabra thingy, which makes me really sad because I really liked it, and now I don't feel safe using it anymore before I break any more bulbs that I probably cannot find replacements for. So that's always great. I did that just before this, so I'm fresh off of sweeping up glass. But let's go ahead and get started. We do have 4 talismanic opportunities to talk about, and they are opportunities that will have a duplicate, I guess. I don't know exactly how to phrase it, or an option in each of the 3 locations that I typically survey. So like North America, North America, Western Europe, and Northern Africa, and Australia will all have opportunities to partake in some of these talismans, which is really, really fun because we don't usually have opportunities like this where everybody kind of gets the same things. But we did our best and we made it work, so here we go. Our first electional opportunity that we're going to have is going to be for a first Lunar Mansion talisman. And some of these talismans that we have coming up are ones that we've had opportunities for in the most recent past as well. So like the last couple of waxing moon videos, you'll see some repeats from those. So this is one of those things where it's fun and it's not fun. Because on the one hand, it's nice to have repeat opportunities for talismans just for people who weren't able to take advantage of them last time for whatever reason. But sometimes it can get a little boring when we're talking about the same ones over and over again. But hopefully these are pretty useful across the board. But our first one is the first Lunar Mansion, and this is a mansion that is primarily focused on energy and overcoming inertia and the utilization of energy for motivation, for completion, for beginning, for overcoming difficulties in working and getting things done, and overall just a really helpful talisman. It can also be useful for trips and for journeys, for safety, for while traveling, things like that. Overall, it's just a very helpful talisman. The first Lunar Mansion is for overcoming a bunch of different like motivational concerns, motivational issues, energy issues, helping to kind of funnel the energy that we do have into supportive and helpful projects or goals or things like that. So I tend to recommend the first Lunar Mansion a lot for people who feel very stuck where they are, who feel very unable to move forward with whatever they're trying to work on, who feel overcome with feelings of like anxiety or stress or procrastination when it comes to completing things and things like that. What I don't recommend the first Lunar Mansion for is for recuperating or for kind of recovering from burnout or things like that, kind of helping you push through burnout. The first Lunar Mansion, well, that's not how burnout works, right? Like you don't push through burnout, you tend to it. And the first Lunar Mansion is definitely gonna encourage you to keep pushing probably further than you ought to. So if you're having issues with things and you feel like it's probably stemming more from burnout, then just take a break. Do what you can to take a break and find periods of rest where and when you can. But the first Lunar Mansion is not really going to help you with that very much. So taking a look at our elections, for the North American continent, this first Lunar Mansion opportunity takes place on February 22nd at around 8-ish in the morning. This chart here is set for 8:10. Oh, and speaking of, so last time I experimented and I had the dates and times for the charts like on the whole thing. And wouldn't you know it, the first time that I do that is when I mess up and have like an error on one of the charts, like the whole time I'm talking about it. So I'm going to do better about that and my fat fingers this time, hopefully. But we'll see how that washes out. But for our North American version of this chart, like I said, February 22nd, 8:10-ish a.m. And we're going to have the moon here in the first Lunar Mansion in this kind of kerfluffle of benefic planets. The moon separating from Venus and applying to Jupiter. And this is what is kind of classically referred to as veneration, when the moon is caught between the aspects of the two benefic planets. This might also be able to work with the sun too in these two, but the texts are unclear, I think. I'm not sure they really specify. But veneration is the word that is used a lot in the tradition, kind of the opposite of besiege, which is probably a bit more well known. But in this chart, the moon is venerated, which is nice, and she's applying a conjunction with Jupiter. And I do like Jupiter a lot for the first lunar mansion specifically. Jupiter, the sun, I think are really good because they're both very like stabilizing and nurturing kind of planets. Jupiter, obviously more so, but even the sun to an extent. So they're very helpful in like easing you into getting things done and, helping you overcome and having that kind of space to overcome procrastination or, whatever negative emotions that you have associated with whatever it is that you're working on that's keeping you from completing it. Jupiter is very helpful to do that. And this is one that you can take a couple of different ways, I think, and this will probably be true for other times we see this chart. So I have this set for a late Pisces ascendant because I like Jupiter as the ruler of the first house in this instance, and having the kind of the double benefics of both Venus and Jupiter in the first house in this chart I think is very helpful. The alternative is if you wanted, you could do this a little bit later, like 820-ish. Get early Aries and get Mars as the ruler of the first house. I think that's fine too. I don't hate that. The only thing that I preferred is I like Jupiter being more angular, whereas Mars is a little bit more cadent. But like if you would prefer the Mars ruled sign over the Jupiter ruled sign, I'm not going to fight you about it. I think they're both perfectly valid options. So whichever one makes more sense to you, or maybe whichever one fits better in your schedule, or maybe you just have better planets in Pisces or Aries, and that kind of helps you make your decision. That's totally fine. Absolutely do it. The Western Europe and Northern African version of this chart is February 22nd at around 3 o'clock. This chart is specifically set for 14:58, so like 2 minutes before 3. And a similar setup, but now everything is on the midheaven. So now you have the moon on the midheaven, and she's still venerated, separating from Venus, applying to Jupiter. While the moon is also the ruler of the first house, which I think is really nice too. So, less to worry about. Mars and Saturn aren't involved with this. And it's just kind of continuing that moon in this kind of nice, safe, protected, restful place, which I think can be very helpful. While, like, this safe, protected, restful place, while also moving towards Jupiter, which is more of an active planet than like Venus, So we kind of still have this restful vibe going on, but now we're kind of moving out of it towards being more productive, towards producing more, towards having more consistent force or current of energy, I guess we'll say, that Jupiter more represents here. So I think that's really great. The malefics aren't involved here to interfere with it. And unlike the last one, I think you really need to maintain the late Cancer ascendant, so I wouldn't go into Leo, because if you go into Leo as the here, then the ruler of the first house is, of course, the Sun, and I think the Sun is a little too conjoined Saturn here, and the Saturn's like anti-first house. Saturn is like anti-first mansion vibes, so you wouldn't really want that with Saturn. Saturn's going to like compound a lot of the fear or anxiety about things and make it more difficult to overcome. So no to the Saturn, keep the Moon, keep the Cancer rising, no to the Leo rising. And then for the Australian version of this chart is going to be February 23rd at around 9 in the morning. This chart is set for 9:04. And this one you have to be a little bit careful, or like at least mindful about, because while it does look very similar to the North American version of this chart, kind of on first glance, and I guess that's kind of misleading because it is very similar to it no matter how many glances you take at it. The big kind of thing to be mindful of is that the moon is still venerated in this conjunction of Venus and Jupiter in the first house, which is exactly what we want. But the moon is like right on top of Jupiter here, right? They're like, what is this, like 24-ish degree? No, yeah, sure, whatever. 20 some odd degrees. I can't do math that fast. 25 minutes. So less than half a degree apart from one another. So you have to be like really careful, really mindful about this to make sure that the moon is still applying this conjunction, which she should be. She should be, but just make sure to double check it, because when she gets past this, I had another option for this. Actually, I guess I'll go ahead and talk about it. So be mindful of this if you want to take advantage of this particular instance, because then you can have Jupiter still as the ruler of the first house, and I like Jupiter a little bit more in this case. But I did have down sort of an alternative for this chart, which is set for kind of an hour later. If you wanted to do something more like this, or maybe this fit your schedule a little bit better for whatever reason, so more towards 10:04 in the morning. And here it's kind of the same thing. The only thing that's really different is, of course, the moon is no longer venerated. So the moon veneration, I think, is a big deal. It's a pretty important, a pretty significant, or at least a very unique aspect of this election. But if you're not able to get it and you still want to use that, then you can use this one with the moon applying the sextile to Mars now in Gemini. I feel like Mars in Gemini as just kind of like an energy source is very like more scattered, like much more helpful for like multitasking or kind of doing multiple things at once. And not so helpful in like concentration and, you know, on kind of the one thing or moving forward in a way that like Jupiter and Aries probably is better at. But it's still like an energy source. It's still, you know, pushing forward, overcoming things, pushing back against obstacles or, you know, hurdles or things like that. So we're still in the theme of what the first lunar mansion can do, which makes Jupiter or Mars perfectly viable alternatives to one another. It's just the flavor of the election changes. So if you feel like maybe a more Mars type of approach to the situation is more your style or is more helpful given like the context of whatever it is that you're kind of struggling with, then do it. You know, just do it. But if you feel like the Jupiter is probably better aligned to your preferences of how you work or, you know, more helpful to what it is that you're doing, then defer to the previous election, like the hour before. So the next electional opportunity that we're going to have is going to be for the 8th Lunar Mansion. And the 8th Lunar Mansion is a really fun one. It is primarily focused on achieving victory. So historically, it's been within the context of like battlefield victory, military victories, things like that. So that's probably not a situation that many of us are going to be faced with, but we can be engaged in conflicts with other people for a variety of reasons. So if you're kind of in any situation where you are up against somebody else and it's kind of like an us versus them, or there is like a victory to be seized against another party, the 8th Lunar Mansion can help you out, whether it's like competitions, scholarships, grants, applications, or even like buying a house if you're against like multiple, like if there are, you know, different offers going back and forth, job promotion could be another one. Litigation is an obvious one, like legal avenues. And so anything like that, the 8th Lunar Mansion can help you with. There's also an aspect of the 8th Lunar Mansion that's about safety with traveling and for like shoring up friendships and alliances. But the kind of the theme of like victory is the big piece, the big kind of centerpiece of the 8th Lunar Mansion to be aware of with it. But taking a look at our elections for this 8th Lunar Mansion. Quick note about the 8th Lunar Mansion. I keep meaning to say this every time. Because it's kind of a thing, but every time we talk about the 8th Lunar Mansion, I always forget to mention this. The suffumigation for the 8th Lunar Mansion is sulfur, and obviously sulfur is toxic to breathe, so don't do it. What I have often done for the 8th Lunar Mansion is there, in most commercial matches, there tends to be a little bit of sulfur in the match head, which is what makes that weird smell when you light it. And that tends to be what I use. It's like I just quickly will light a couple of matches during the sort of like invocation suffumigation. So please don't go and breathe in toxic chemicals for this or any election. It's not worth it. And there are often much more creative solutions to be able to get what you need to be able to utilize it. So, you know, don't just go buy a bunch of sulfur and have it smoking in your house. That's bad. But we can use it in very, very small doses to kind of get what we need done. And if the talisman spirit has an issue with that, then they should have picked something that wasn't antithetical to human life. That's all I gotta say about that. But anyway, so that's something that I keep meaning to mention whenever we talk about the 8th Lunar Mansion. I keep trying to remember to talk about or point out the ones that have kind of like weird suffumigations or like weird ritual components and how I have worked around them to make them a little bit more accessible and a bit safer for people who may be interested. So yeah, matches are really good. But anyway, taking a look at our election, this one for the North American continent, which takes place on March 1st at 13:20, so 1:20 p.m. And here we have the moon in the 8th Lunar Mansion in the first house, conjoined the ascendant. And at this time, she's applying this trine to the sun, and that is perfect. That is excellent. Sun trines, of course, I love. Most of the time, if it's a Lunar Mansion talisman, I love aspects between the sun and the moon. I especially try to hit those trines whenever we can, because you can usually get a lot of good oomph out of it. The kind of waxing trine, I think, is a really strong aspect, and the waning sextile, I think, is another really strong aspect for the moon. But the having this, because mostly because the sun represents, specifically within the eighth lunar mansion, in that context, the sun represents things like honors and awards and things that you would receive after being victorious. The sun is also like the commander of the other planets. He really doesn't have a superior. The closest he would have is like an equal-ish kind of with Saturn. But just a really strong force there, to be able to get some advantage out of. And I like the idea of the moon being very well dignified while ruling the first house, then having that aspect with the sun, also being supported by this kind of square here of Jupiter and Venus, I think is really nice. And you could probably move this ascendant down further, a little bit more into Cancer if you wanted to solidify this aspect. But otherwise, I think it's really great. It's a really nice setup for this talisman. The only downside is that I believe the moon is still moving pretty slowly at this time. Let's see. Yeah, as you can see here. Oh, actually, you might not be able to because it's might be off the thing. Let me move that. Here we go. Come on now. There we go. So hopefully you can see this. But as you can see right here, moon, slow. Right here, so we're still moving pretty slow in this part of the zodiac, which isn't awesome. So this would be something that you would make for that you wouldn't make if the competition was like tomorrow, something like that, because you would anticipate the manifestation of the talisman to be slower. So keep that in mind. But other than that, it's a really great election. Looking forward to the day when the moon is not slow in this part of the zodiac, but the moon has to be slow in some part of the zodiac. So we take what we can get. For the Western Europe and North African version, it's very, very similar. This chart takes place on March 1st at 12:34 p.m. Very, basically the same thing. It's just the moon is at 4 degrees Cancer instead of 8 degrees Cancer like she was last time. In the 8th lunar mansion, conjoined the ascendant and still applying that trine to the sun. So checking that box, the sun, a planet, is significant of honors and awards. Things that you get when you're victorious, and especially this one. I like this chart a little bit better than the North American version, because now this sun is conjoined the midheaven. So just much more of an oomph in it. Whereas in the North American version, it was cadent in the 9th house, which is still a house that the sun in general does well in because it's his house of joy. But if I wanted a planet that was gonna punch its way to victory, then it would be the sun on the MC rather than the sun on the 9th house. So that's that. You're not going to have as much support from this Venus-Jupiter conjunction in this chart because the aspect is further away, and there's really not a lot you can do to make it closer like you could in the North American version, where you might be able to kind of finesse it to get the ascendant a little bit deeper into Cancer to solidify that aspect. You really don't have that option here, but you are still free from both Mars and Saturn and their machinations to ruin this. It's not going to happen. And then finally, a little bit of a different take on this chart is going to be the Australian version, which takes place on March 1st at just before 9 p.m. at 20:59 is what I have this chart set for, but it could easily have been for 2100. And here we've moved it to where the moon is now in the midheaven in the 8th lunar mansion. She's still got this trine to the sun. It's a little bit further out, and the sun's in the 6th house, which isn't super fun. And we've changed our ascendant ruler. Now we've got Venus, the ruler of the 1st house, in Aries, conjoined Jupiter, which I think helps. I'm not going to say save this chart because I don't really think it needs saving, but it gives a little bit stronger of a kind of protective, victorious vibe, I think, than it would otherwise. But you still are free from the aspect of Mars, and the aspect of Saturn. Venus is sitting here in a nice place away from it, conjoined Jupiter. The moon doesn't have to worry about being harshly aspected by those planets at this time. And we still have that sun connection, even though it's not as in a fortuitous house, I guess we could say. So all in all, I think the Western Europe, Northern African version of this chart is probably the better one, all things considered. But each one gets what it needs to be able to have a viable opportunity for it. But all right, before we move on, let's take a quick break to have a word from our sponsors. Just kidding. It's me. I'm the sponsor. But I do have something fun that I am excited to share with you guys. Longtime viewers may have noticed that the info cards featuring the fixed stars have been changing. Originally, I used the stars' glyphs for images, but have been gradually replacing them with more detailed images described in the source texts. This is because over the past several months, I've been working with artist Terry Johnson to produce new astrological magic image sets, and we're proud to announce the completion of our first one. The Behenian Fixed Stars, an Oracle and Guide, is a unique oracle deck featuring 15 cards, each representing one of the 15 Behenian stars, which lay the foundation for astrological magic. The cards are 4x6, making them the perfect size to use as an oracle deck or to use as a meditative image as part of a ritual or altar setting to one of the stars. The deck also comes with a 65-page booklet introducing the stars, their correspondences, and diving into their history and symbolism. Pre-orders are now live with intent to ship in March. For more information or to place an order, check out the link in the description below. But all right, our third electional opportunity is going to be for a 10th Lunar Mansion talisman. The 10th Lunar Mansion is probably my favorite of the more health-oriented talismans, so it's always really fun when I'm able to find an election for it. There was a time period for a while where we weren't able to use the 10th Lunar Mansion really at all, and I think it was because Saturn was kind of in mid-Aquarius, so kind of casting that opposition to where we would tend to look for those Algebal talismans. But Algebal is a really fun talisman for health concerns. It's really focused on it has some really unique ways of dealing with things, or kind of very unique kind of healing modalities. On the one hand, it's more about strengthening and fortifying health, so it's much more useful in like preventative medicine than it is for like healing itself, or like healing the problem. It also has powers associated with pregnancy and childbirth, both in kind of helping to make sure that the pregnancy moves forward with lowered risk of complications, and that the birthing process itself is as smooth as such a thing goes. But one of the more unique aspects of the 10th Lunar Mansion is that it is very focused on doctors in a way that's kind of weird. And by that I mean the 10th Lunar Mansion, the way that I've seen it work out more often than not, is that it tends to put people in the path that they need to be in to connect with the health professionals that they need to get them the help that they need, whether that's helping them to find doctors, or kind of putting them in a situation where their normal doctor is not available, so they have to go to some different doctor, or that they're referred to this other doctor through whatever means. That is just like, bam, like this is the person that they needed to talk to, who either is willing to listen to them, is willing to listen and hear them about whatever their concerns are, whatever they're dealing with, or who seems to have some, I'm going to say, unusual method of dealing with the situation, or like some weird insight or inspiration to do this, that, or the other, which ends up being the solution. So if any of that sounds like something that you need for whatever reason, the 10th Lunar Mansion is super good about kind of lining things up to make those things happen. So I definitely recommend it to anybody who's dealing with a long-term health condition, especially if it's one that's a little bit more difficult to diagnose or handle, or maybe the treatment has been evasive to pin down. The 10th Lunar Mansion really helps in solidifying that. So that's my hopefully you're also now, hopefully I've successfully converted you to the Church of the 10th Lunar Mansion. That's my goal here. The Church of the 3rd and 10th Lunar Mansion is what I'm gonna call my organization now. But hopefully the 10th Lunar Mansion, hopefully you're able to make this election if any of that sounds interesting to you. But looking at our elections here for North America, this election takes place on March 3rd at 1943, excuse me, so about 7:45-ish, so 15 minutes before 8. And in this election, we've got the moon in the 10th Lunar Mansion, in the 10th Lunar Mansion on the 11th house cusp. And at this time, she's applying this trine to Jupiter. And now this trine is a little bit is a little bit distant, and that was kind of the main issue that I was trying to face here, which is why the moon is not, on the ascendant. And I didn't want her on the midheaven, because then I would get Mars as the ruler of the ascendant, or the node would get close to the ascendant, and I wasn't super comfortable with that, because I know that a lot of people are uncomfortable with that, so I tend to kind of shy away from sharing those charts just because of that. So the moon in the 11th was the best that I could do here. But this aspect is about 7 degrees apart, which I think is fine. Moon connections themselves tend to be very large, so I think this connection is fine. But a lot of the charts that I was initially looking for these, I had to push it through, because the moon becomes void in Cancer. Basically, she goes from being square Jupiter and Venus to not aspecting anything until she comes back to their trine. So I had to kind of push through that to make this connection work a little bit stronger. But a nice connection to this Jupiter-Venus conjunction, which of course are two very health-oriented planets, and I like especially in this chart that they're in the 7th house, which is like which traditionally represents the doctor, or like the professional with whom we are teaming up with to counter our diseases or our illnesses. So I like this being here, just knowing what the 10th Lunar Mansion tends to do, how it tends to work. And then, of course, the ruler of the 1st house is this Venus in Aries, conjoined this Jupiter, not afflicted by Mars or Saturn, which is very good. And for this one, you need to be a little bit careful because the Virgo ascendant is not a good option, in my opinion, because Virgo puts you on Mercury here in Pisces, which is conjoined Saturn, and that's not very healthful. I'm not a big fan of that. So we avoid that. We stick to the Libra ascendant, and that's what we're going to do. The Western Europe and North African chart is very similar, but we're kind of starting to see some of the issues that I was having with the moon and trying to make sure that she wasn't void in this chart, as we'll see in a minute. Because here we have the moon conjoin the midheaven, which is objectively a better position for the moon than the 11th house cusp. But now she's at like 3 degrees Leo. In the North American version, she was in 5 degrees Leo, and that 2 degrees makes up a big difference because now this aspect, this trine to Jupiter, which is the next one, is at 9 degrees apart, and this is where you start getting like, how far can we stretch the moon? Because we're going to do it. But we do still have this applying connection to Jupiter, Jupiter and the Venus conjunction, which is very nice. Again, just a really good combination of benefic planets that want to be healthful, that want to be supportive. And in the 6th house of illness, I think that's fine. I think that makes a lot of sense for it to be here. Just because typically having benefic planets, all things being equal, having benefic planets in difficult houses like the 6th house helps to protect from the more difficult manifestations of 6th house things. So like less serious illness, more easily treatable complications, things like that. So having this here, I think, is generally a good sign. Saturn and Mars are not afflicting any like participant in this. I think it's kind of interesting that they're both kind of trine. They kind of make this weird grand trine with the ascendant, but don't super read into that. At least it's not like a T-square, then we would definitely pull from there. But we do have Venus as the ruler of the 1st house because Libra is rising, and kind of fun thing because Spica and Arcturus are kind of both here at 24 degrees. So Arcturus especially is a very healthful oriented star. So, maybe throw in something about that for those who are a little bit more advanced in their magical practice and feel comfortable pulling in fixed stars in non-fixed star talismans. Maybe there's something there. But you want to make sure to keep the Libra ascendant, to keep Venus here. And that has more to do with my preference than anything like blackout, we'll say. Because if you have, a Scorpio rising, then kind of like I talked about with the North American version, people get antsy with the nodes there, and I get it. But even just putting that aside, you get Mars as the ruler of the 1st, which is in the 8th. Probably not cool for this specifically. But it's like you could have Mars in Gemini, or you could have Venus conjoin Jupiter. So, it's not a hard choice to me. And then finally, for the Australian version of this chart, it's on March 4th at 1804, so just a little bit after 6 p.m. And this is a little bit more similarly... No, it's not. They're all kind of unique, aren't they? The North American version had the moon in the 11th. The Western Europe and Northern African version had the moon on the midheaven. And this one has the moon on the ascendant. So the moon's on the ascendant here in the 10th Lunar Mansion, less than a degree out of it. The 10th Lunar Mansion ends at 8 degrees Leo and 34 minutes, so be mindful of that. It shouldn't be a problem, but I just try to make a habit of pointing out when the moon is close to the end of a lunar mansion so that you know that like we're done here at a certain point. And applying this trine to Jupiter. This is the closest Jupiter conjunction between the 3 locations. This is the closest the aspect is. The closest perfection is what I meant. Between the 3 locations, 5 degrees, a very solid number for Moon-Jupiter conjunction, so we don't have to worry about issues of like being void or kind of stretching and things like that, like we sometimes do with talismans. I try to be good about pointing out when they happen. Let's see. The ruler of the 1st house is the Sun here because Leo's on the ascendant. The Sun is far enough away from Saturn to not have to worry about it. We are getting a little close to this Mars square, so I will point this out here. 7 degrees. I'll let you kind of decide how you feel about that. whether or not that feels comfortable to you, whether or not you like it. If you don't feel comfortable with that, like if you feel like this Mars square to the ruler of the first house is a little too close, that's fine. What you can do instead is, what you can do instead is if you want to back this up to get like a late Cancer ascendant, to get the moon as the ruler of the first house, because the moon is free from the aspects of the malefics entirely, and so is the ascendant here in late Cancer. And you don't lose a whole lot. You just kind of get the moon pushed back from from the ascendant some here. So if you don't like the Mars square to the sun and you don't want that involved in your plate, which I can totally understand, especially from something that's kind of more sensitive as a health-based talisman, then try to shoot for something more like 1745 to keep those last couple of degrees of Cancer on the ascendant, to get the moon, who's free from a lot of that and gets to be, connected to this really cool Jupiter-Venus conjunction. So that might be kind of the better alternative to the sort of one that is more focused on the moon being super angular. So our final electional opportunity that we're going to have during our waxing moon period here is going to be for the 11th lunar mansion, Al-Zubra. And Al-Zubra is a mansion that I've had a lot of fun with in the past, and I definitely recommend it to a lot of people. I guess I recommend every talisman to a lot of people, but that goes without saying. But the 11th lunar mansion is one that is very focused on increasing wealth, helping to advance in career, gaining recognition and favors from authority, and it is a mansion that is kind of uniquely situated to excel in our sort of corporate culture, which focuses a lot on like recommendation, especially those that like hire internally or advance and promote internally, and in promotions or like raise or wage negotiations, the 11th lunar mansion is very helpful on. So if you're useful, so that's kind of what you want to do, then there you go. There's also some aspects of the 11th lunar mansion, maybe in more of a waning context, that are about like being left alone. So kind of the opposite, right? So there's like the part of the 11th lunar mansion that's like, notice me and give me good things, kind of the career advancement, getting favors from authority. And then there's the part of the 11th lunar mansion that's like, I just want to be left alone, and you should be afraid of me because I am riding a lion and have a spear, and that's scary. So just kind of two different things to two different ways to kind of approach the 11th lunar mansion. I think the kind of being left alone or aspect of it, kind of being left out of things that you don't want to be involved in, is a little bit more waning moon oriented. So I wouldn't really look into it here, but I would definitely look at the 11th lunar mansion when we're talking about advancement, like career advancement specifically or especially. But taking a look at our elections for the North American continent, this is kind of the weakest version of this that I was able to do, unfortunately. This one takes place on March 4th at 12:34 p.m., so just a little bit after lunch. And here we have the moon in the 11th lunar mansion conjoin the cusp of the third house, so a house that the moon finds her joy in. It's sort of like the last-ditch effort that I was able to do to get a talisman for this one here. Because what I wanted to do was I wanted to focus on this conjunction focus on the aspect to either Jupiter or Venus. Here the moon is applying to Venus. We're just a little bit past the trine to Jupiter here. But we got this trine to Venus. And Venus, of course, has a benefic planet that wants us to succeed, that wants us to advance. We have the sun very angular here on the midheaven, which I think is a really nice touch. While the moon rules the first house here from the third, unafflicted by Mars or Saturn. And it's really unfortunate. I wanted to get this a little bit more angular, but I wasn't. I'm trying to juggle two things, and one of them is maintaining the moon's aspect to one of these two benefic planets, so either Jupiter or Venus, but also keeping the moon far enough away to where the opposition with Saturn is not something that kind of comes into it. So we don't have to worry about this Saturn opposition. I want to keep it far enough away, and unfortunately this was really the best that I was able to do to get that. So a little unfortunate, because it would have been nice if the moon were a bit in a more of a stronger position, 10, 11, or 1. But hey, we do the best that we can, and this is the best that we can right now for North America. The Western European version, North African, I think had a much more ideal setup, of course, than the North American version. That being the moon here in the 11th mansion, conjoined the ascendant, applying that trine to Jupiter here, and being able to kind of partake and participate in this nice Jupiter-Venus conjunction, which is all about, helping things out. While also having the sun as the ruler of the first house here. The sun's unafflicted by Saturn or Mars. Or no, well, I guess we kind of get back into that discussion about like how close is too close with this square. So we might still have issues here with like how far is this. And I would recommend kind of the same thing if you want. Kind of dip this ascendant back to get the late Cancer if you wanted. So you could do something more like this, get the late Cancer. This happens about an hour earlier at 1428. You still have the moon in the first house, which is really nice. Still applying the trine to Jupiter, which is now on the midheaven. And then you get Cancer, which lets the moon rule the first house. So you don't have to worry about the Mars-Saturn square. I'm sorry, it's the Mars-Sun square, my bad. So consider that as an alternative if you don't care as much about the moon being super angular. And then finally, the Australian version of this chart takes place on March 4th at 21:06, so just after 9 p.m. And here the moon is in the 9th Lunar Mansion, and this is just a couple of hours after the 10th Lunar Mansion one in Australia. So we have the moon here in the 11th house in the 11th Lunar Mansion. That's fun, right? It actually doesn't really matter, but I think it's neat. Still applying that trine to this Jupiter-Venus conjunction, which is a nice, benefic conjunction that wants people to succeed and wants to help people out, whether that's give them money or awards or whatever it is you want to get the 11th Lunar Mansion to get you. Jupiter and Venus are good planets to get help from in accomplishing it. The moon is unafflicted by Mars or Saturn, and you can get the Libra ascendant here to get Venus as the ruler of the first house, which will benefit kind of extra from the conjunction with Jupiter here. While also being unafflicted by Mars or Saturn, and there are no real alternatives that we really have to do to get that to work for us. I wanted to do this in a way to maintain this nice angularity for this conjunction as much as I could, so that's why we went for the moon in the 11th house. But all right, thank you guys so much for being here and for watching, and I hope that one of these 4 really great talismanic elections for these 4 really strongly waxing-oriented lunar mansions can provide you some help for dealing with whatever situation that it is that you find yourself faced up against. And a big shout out to all of my patrons especially. Thank you guys so much for your support. If you're interested in supporting the channel and making Ty and the other cats pay attention to me when they clearly don't want to, take a look at the Patreon and all the bonuses that come with it for signing up, whether that's a 6-hour introductory mini course to astrological magic, if maybe it's something you're a little bit more new to, talismanic gifts, office hours, community building, just a whole bunch of stuff. Take a look and see if anything there catches your fancy. Love to have you aboard. If you're interested in checking out the Behenian Fixed Star Oracle deck, make sure to check out the link in the description below. Pre-orders are now live, and it will ship sometime next month, sometime in March. But everybody take care, and I will see you guys again on the Virgo Full Moon.